We're about to dive into a conflict that didn't just redraw the map of the world, it literally shattered it. I'm talking about World War I. But that name, it almost doesn't do it justice. People at the time called it the Great War. And great really meant its horrifying scale and its incredible lasting impact. You gotta understand, this wasn't just another war. It was like a global earthquake. It completely wiped ancient empires off the map and reshaped societies in ways that, believe it or not, we are still feeling over a century later. So, that's the big question, isn't it? How did the assassination of just one man manage to drag the entire world into one of the deadliest conflicts in all of human history? Well, to get that, we have to rewind a little. We have to look at what the world was like before a single shot was ever fired. Okay, so think of it this way. To really get why the explosion happened, you first have to understand the bomb itself. And Europe, before 1914, it was anything but peaceful. It was a giant powder keg, just sitting there, waiting for a spark. You had all these major powers in Europe basically locked in this intense, fierce competition. Their armies were getting bigger and bigger, nationalism was just boiling over, and everybody was scrambling for more land, more wealth, more power. You could practically feel the tension in the air. It was electric. And right at the heart of all this tension was this tangled web of alliances. It basically split Europe into two big armed camps. On one side, you have the Triple Entente, that's Britain, France, and Russia. On the other, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And these weren't just friendly handshakes, These were hardcore promises. If one of them got attacked, the others had to jump in. It was like a tripwire stretched across the entire continent. Well, in the summer of 1914, somebody stumbled right over that tripwire. And that brings us to the spark, the one that lit the fuse and sent all the dominoes toppling. I mean, the speed at which everything escalated is just breathtaking. It all starts in June 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is assassinated. 1 month later, just 1 month, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. And by August, because of all those alliances we just talked about, pretty much the entire continent is at war. It happened that fast. And you can see the whole domino effect right here. It's a perfect chain reaction. Step 1, Austria-Hungary attacks Serbia. Okay. Then Russia, who's friends with Serbia, starts mobilizing its army to protect them. That makes Germany, Austria-Hungary's ally, jump in. And then, bam, France and Britain get dragged in to back up Russia. It's just one domino after another falling perfectly in line. So, the war is on. The dominoes have fallen. But what was it actually like for the people fighting it? This wasn't like any war that came before. It introduced a totally new, brutal reality, one defined by endless trenches and some, frankly, terrifying new technology. If there's one single image that defines World War I, it has to be the trench. Both sides literally dug themselves into the ground, carving thousands of miles of these muddy, rat-infested ditches across Europe. And what did that lead to? A horrible, brutal stalemate, where these huge armies were just fighting and dying, sometimes for just a few inches of land. And life in those trenches, it was a waking nightmare. It wasn't even just about the bullets and the shells flying overhead. The soldiers were in a constant battle with disease, with hunger, and just the sheer psychological terror of waiting, always waiting, for the next attack. It was just an existence of absolute misery. And to make all of that even worse, you had these brand new tools of war. We're talking rapid-fire machine guns that made charging across open land, no man's land, basically a suicide mission. There was poison gas that could choke you right where you stood in the trenches. And, for the very first time, we see tanks and aircraft on the battlefield. This was industrial age warfare, and it was more destructive than anything the world had ever seen. So for years, it's just this bloody, grinding stalemate. But eventually, the war hits a breaking point, and a couple of really big events are about to happen that will change absolutely everything. Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1917. We're 3 long, brutal years into this thing. Both sides are just completely exhausted. They've been bled dry of soldiers, of supplies, of everything. Something had to give.
And then it did. Two massive, game-changing events happen almost at the same time. First up, Russia. It's completely consumed by its own revolution back home, so the government collapses and they pull out of the war. That's a huge blow for the Allies. But just as one major power leaves the stage, another one enters. Germany's unrestricted submarine attacks finally pushed the United States over the edge. They joined the Allies, bringing fresh troops, fresh resources, and a whole lot of industrial power. This was the move that would tip the scales for good. With America now in the fight, the tide really did turn for good. The end was in sight. But, and this is a big but, the end of the fighting was really just the beginning of the war's incredibly deep and lasting legacy.
So the fighting finally comes to a stop on November 11th, 1918. Germany is facing total collapse at home and certain defeat on the battlefield, so they agree to a ceasefire. The guns finally fall silent. But the world that was revealed when the smoke cleared, it was shattered, just completely beyond recognition.
And the cost, it was just staggering. We're talking millions of soldiers and civilians dead, an entire generation lost. Politically, major empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, the Ottoman, they were just gone, vanished from the map. And economically, even the countries that won had their economies completely ruined. The official end to the war came with the Treaty of Versailles. But here's the thing. Instead of helping to heal the world's wounds, this treaty basically poured salt right into them. It forced Germany to take all the blame for the war and demanded these crippling payments, called reparations. All this did was create a deep, bitter resentment, one that would just sit there and fester for the next 20 years. And that brings us to the final haunting question. This conflict was so awful, so devastating, that people actually called it the war to end all wars. The idea was, okay, humanity has learned its lesson. We're never doing that again. So why didn't it work? Why, just 2 decades later, did the world plunge itself into an even bigger, even deadlier war? Well, a big part of the answer lies right there, in those unresolved scars and in the seeds of resentment that were planted the moment this war ended.